Welcome to the deep dive. When we look at the source material for the case of Carla Walker, what just jumps out at you is the sheer scale of the delay. We're talking 47 years.
A whole lifetime of waiting for one family.
It really is. This story, it's an incredible lesson in the intersection of this heartbreaking, decades-long personal conviction and the stunning, almost unbelievable precision of advanced forensic science.
It truly is. For this deep dive, we've organized the material to unpack three key themes for you. We look first at the devastating human cost of an unsolved crime. You know, what those 47 years actually did to the Walker family.
Right.
Then we'll examine the revolutionary technological leaps that are completely redefining what justice looks like in these crowd cases. And finally, we explore this extraordinary, really powerful concept of forgiveness that you find at the very end of this long, dark journey.
And that journey, it begins on, well, the most sentimental of dates, Valentine's Day, 1974, in Fort Worth, Texas. Carla Walker was 17, a bright, popular student, and she was out with her high school sweetheart, 18-year-old Rodney McCoy.
The whole evening was supposed to be perfect. Rodney had saved up. He'd planned for months to make this big gesture of commitment. He presented Carla with a promise ring.
And it was a delicate little gold rose with a small diamond set in the middle.
It's just a classic, teenage sentimental moment, a sign that they were committed to a future together. But that moment was violently erased late that night.
They had parked in a secluded area after school dance.
And as they were just sitting there, a dark silhouette appears suddenly at the passenger window, holding a pistol. Before Rodney could even register what was happening, the stranger just strikes him viciously in the face with the butt of the gun.
The sources describe it as this brutal, just chaotic assault. And here is where the tragedy takes its most agonizing turn. As the attacker is beating Rodney, something vital happens.
His pistol jammed.
It jammed.
He stops beating Rodney for a critical moment to clear the weapon, obviously preparing to shoot and kill him.
And Carla sees this. She sees that delay.
In what can only be described as a gut-wrenching, just reflexive act of sacrifice, she screams out, "Stop hitting him, I'll go with you."
She's actively choosing to save his life.
The last coherent sound Rodney heard before losing consciousness was her voice, just desperate and terrified, screaming, "Rodney, go get my dad!"
That terrifying scream, followed by the screech of tires, it woke up Carla's 12-year-old brother, Jim Walker. He was asleep on the couch at home, not far from the scene at all.
Jim heard a car hit the curb. Then he hears Rodney's voice yelling, "Mr. Walker, Mr. Walker!"
He runs outside and finds his sister's boyfriend just stumbling across their front lawn, covered in blood and barely conscious. The passenger seat of their car was empty.
And the initial investigation, unfortunately, focused heavily on the wrong person. After 3 days of searching, Carla's body was discovered inside a cattle culvert on the outskirts of Fort Worth.
Yeah, the sources note that a seasoned detective actually recalled a similar, eerily close case, the murder of Becky Martin a year earlier, which gave them the grim hunch that led them to that culvert.
But the immediate, intense suspicion fell squarely and really unfairly on Rodney McCoy.
And it's so crucial to understand the trauma of that time. Rodney's rushed to the hospital with a severe head injury. But once he's released, the Walker family's loyalty was just absolute.
Oh, completely. He stayed at their house, sleeping in Carla's own bed. They treated him like a son. They fiercely believed his story.
But the broader community and, crucially law enforcement, they just viewed him as the sole convenient suspect.
And the pressure, it reached a new peak at Carla's funeral. Rodney, just heartbroken, noticed the promise ring he'd given her was missing.
And here's the clue that complicated everything.
The ring was later found. It had been pulled off her finger and placed next to her body in the culvert. To the grieving family, it was just a cruel detail. To investigators, it looked like a confusing, almost staged clue.
It just deepened the suspicion that Rodney was involved somehow.
Exactly. And because of that scrutiny, the public judgment, and just the sheer weight of what he felt he owed Carla, Rodney made a life-altering decision.
Immediately after graduation, he left Fort Worth. He moved all the way to Alaska to work on an oil rig and never came back to Texas for decades. He always carried this belief that Carla had saved his life by sacrificing her own.
He internalized the guilt of being the one who survived.
So if Rodney carried the burden of guilt, Jim, Carla's younger brother, he carried this fire of rage and an obsession for revenge.
The sources describe his decades-long fixation in truly harrowing detail. For years after the murder, Jim would go to that cold, dark cattle culvert where her body had been found. He would actually sleep there.
He was trying to inhabit his sister's final moments. He needed to be in that cold, dark, terrifying place.
And he openly admitted it. He was hoping the killer would return so that he could, in his words, take care of him right there. This wasn't just grieving. It was a complete psychological fixation born out of powerlessness.
Exactly. He wanted to channel that fury into something productive, so he tried to pursue justice through, traditional law enforcement. He applied to the police academy.
And he got in. He was accepted. He was determined to become the detective who would finally solve his sister's case.
But fate, it just intervened with a terrible twist. During an entry exam, Jim realized his vision was blurring constantly.
He was diagnosed with a rare, degenerative genetic condition that was causing legal blindness. It was irreversible and only going to get worse.
Which just crushed his primary path to justice. It threw this massive wrench into his future and left him feeling completely defeated and powerless all over again.
The emotional toll of this unsolved crime, it just devastated the Walker family. By 2020, 46 years later, Jim was the only Walker left in Fort Worth.
He believed his parents had died of broken hearts, never having received justice for Carla, feeling that they had somehow failed their daughter.
But Jim's drive was relentless, and this is where we see the transition from, human persistence to actual institutional action. Every single year, Jim called the Fort Worth Police Cold Case Department.
Every year.
And he eventually reached Detective Leah Wagner, the new cold case investigator. Jim pressed her on the terrible scale of the problem. The department had 971 unsolved murders, but he stressed to her, whoever did this is either dead, dying, or running out of daylight.
And Detective Wagner, she recognized that Jim's persistence wasn't just grief, it was leverage. She saw a chance to correct decades of institutional failure and was professionally compelled to reopen the case.
Okay, let's unpack this shift in the investigation, because this is where modern science finally steps in to try and right decades of injustice and suspicion, particularly for Rodney.
Detective Wagner was absolutely determined, not just to find the killer, but just as importantly, to finally exonerate Rodney McCoy after 46 years of public doubt.
What's fascinating here is how close the evidence came to being completely useless.
Yeah.
Back in 1974, police had meticulously collected evidence, including a full pistol magazine and Carla's torn clothing. In 2009, they managed to retrieve some DNA from the dress, but it was unusable. Wagner insisted on pushing further, and they were finally able to isolate a single source, full male profile off of Carla's bra.
Okay, so they have a profile.
They were thrilled, but the sample was, it was infinitesimal, only 5 nanograms.
5 nanograms. To put that in perspective for you listening, that's an impossibly small amount, right? Why couldn't they just put that into CODIS?
And that's the critical technical detail here. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, that's the national index for matching known criminal DNA profiles. It requires a certain threshold of DNA quantity and quality to generate a search.
Okay.
5 nanograms was considered barely enough to exclude suspects.
You could clear people.
You could use it to clear people, but certainly not enough to clinch a positive identification in the existing federal database. It was a lead, but a dead end for standard procedure.
So if the established national system couldn't use it, what was the next move?
Detective Wagner knew of a small private laboratory south of Houston with cutting-edge technology designed specifically to handle these trace amounts of DNA. But here's the risk they faced. This advanced testing technique required using up the entire remaining sample. If the technique failed, or if the sample degraded during the process, the last physical piece of evidence in the Carla Walker case would be gone. Forever.
That is a significant all-or-nothing gamble. You're putting all your chips on one final technological leap.
But Jim and Wagner, they were willing to take that enormous risk to finally get answers, and thankfully, the gamble paid off. The new, specialized DNA profile led directly to a name, Glenn McCurley.
And what's truly remarkable about that is McCurley was not a new face. He was suspect number 22 in the original 1974 investigation.
That's right. Back then, police had focused on local owners of registered Ruger pistols because the loaded pistol magazine, that critical piece of evidence left at the scene, was a Ruger magazine.
So they interviewed McCurley.
They did, and he even successfully passed a polygraph test back then.
Wait, so he was the right guy. They questioned him using the correct lead-the-gun clip, but he successfully lied his way out of the investigation using a polygraph.
Yeah.
That right there, that just highlights the inherent unreliability of traditional evidence when you're confronted with the precision of modern forensic power. The case went cold because a decades-old technology failed.
Exactly. But DNA, it doesn't care about a polygraph. When detectives researched where McCurley was living, they found he was still in Fort Worth,
No way.
only a couple of miles away from where Carla was abducted, living quietly all those years. When Detective Wagner went to question him, he tried to construct an alibi. But his wife, Judy, she corrected his attempts right in front of the detective, pointing out his timeline was faulty.
McCurley had the right to refuse a DNA sample, and he did. So the officers had to use a more modern technique. They waited until late at night, dug through his trash, and recovered a plastic McDonald's straw.
And that straw, just casually discarded, yielded a DNA match to the 5 nanograms found on Carla's bra. He was arrested on September 21st, 2020.
And during the interrogation, McCurley eventually cracked. He offered a limited confession.
Jim called Rodney immediately, just telling him, "We got him, buddy." But this limited confession, it immediately raised some red flags for the detectives.
How so?
When they asked him about where he left Carla's body, McCurley insisted it was the Sida building, not the cattle culvert where she was actually found.
That discrepancy, it suggests a major, chilling possibility. She may not be his only victim.
And the sources confirm that. Between 1967 and 1985, several women and girls had been abducted and killed around Valentine's Day in the Fort Worth area.
So McCurley is now unofficially dubbed the Valentine's Day Killer, suspected of involvement in 4 to 7 similar victims.
And when detectives pressed him further for answers about these other potential victims, he just completely shut down.
Despite the crushing disappointment that he wouldn't provide peace for those other families, Jim Walker had, by this point, moved past the desire for revenge.
His decades of focused anger culminated not in pure hatred for Glenn McCurley, but in this profound, really surprising sense of compassion.
He recognized that the killer's family, especially Glenn McCurley's son, Roddy McCurley, were also victims. Roddy was publicly devastated. He'd spent years trying to get his closed-off father to confess to other crimes for the sake of those families.
Jim saw his own decades of pain reflected in this broken man. And this is, I think, the most powerful moment in the entire case. During the trial in August 2021, Jim Walker approached Roddy McCurley.
Roddy's entire world had just been devastated by his father's actions.
And Jim walked right up to him and, recognizing this secondary victimhood, he asked, "Roddy, can I give you a hug, buddy?" And he did. He told him with deep conviction, "You're not responsible for the sins of your father. You do not own this."
Wow. And the sources described just a visible shift in the courtroom. The very next day, Jim and Rodney sat beside the McCurley family. They created this united front of victims and survivors.
And something shifted dramatically in Glenn McCurley himself, maybe seeing his victim's brother offer kindness to his own son. Before the third day of testimony could even begin, he quietly told his attorney he was changing his plea to guilty.
After nearly half a century, the cold case was resolved. Just like that.
Glenn McCurley was immediately sentenced to life in prison, and this provided enormous healing, not just for the Walkers, but for the entire community of Fort Worth that had lived with this horror for decades.
And to mark the end of the case and Rodney's return to Fort Worth after all those years, Jim and Detective Wagner presented Rodney with the ultimate surprise. They returned the promise ring he lost 46 years earlier.
A final, completely unexpected piece of closure, giving Rodney a tangible piece of his heart and his history back.
The closure in this case is not just a historical note either. It's actively shaping the future of forensic law.
That's right. Texas Senator John Cornyn is now pushing for a bill named after the victim, the Carla Walker Act. This legislation would help fund the advanced forensic technology, specifically the kind used to identify suspects with these insufficient 5-nanogram DNA samples.
Helping solve countless other cold cases trapped in that CODIS loophole.
Exactly. And Jim Walker's focus has similarly shifted from personal vengeance to public service. He remains close friends with Rodney, Detective Wagner, and even Roddy McCurley. His new goal, now that Carla's case is closed, is to help other families find justice.
Ensuring that Carla's legacy continues to push for breakthroughs that take, in his words, a lot of bad people off the streets.
So what does this all mean for you? This deep dive, it wasn't just about solving a single crime. It was about seeing how this impossible intersection of personal conviction, Jim Walker's 4 decades of relentless phone calls, and the stunning precision of advanced science,
That 5 nanograms of DNA.
merged to rewrite history for multiple families.
And here's where it gets really interesting and raises an important question for you to mull over. Considering how specialized technology allowed investigators to identify and prosecute a suspect who had successfully passed a polygraph test 46 years prior, What does this tell us about the long-term reliability of traditional evidence versus modern forensic science in securing true justice?
And further, how many other cold cases might be unlocked, not by finding brand new evidence, but simply by revisiting fragile, old evidence, like that tiny DNA sample, with the new funding that could be afforded by something like the Carla Walker Act. Something to think about as you go about your day.